Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. I've been reading a lot of Reddit lately, especially the entitled parents section. I created a new account specifically to share my story. Until now, Reddit has just been my guilty morning coffee read. I'm an only child. My mom passed away from ovarian cancer at 55 in 2020. It devastated my dad. They'd been together since their university days and were practically the same age, dad being just a month older. I'm 22 now, about to finish my degree in biochemistry when everything started happening. I attended university on a full scholarship, which becomes relevant later. My dad met my future stepmom, Sarah, when she was my mom's nurse during her final days at Memorial Hospital. Sarah knew exactly how to play her cards to win my dad's trust. "Your wife was such a special person," she'd say to him, placing her hand on his shoulder. "I can see how much you loved her." I was 17 then, old enough to see through her act. She was clearly trying to get her hands on my dad's money, but it wasn't my place to interfere. I was focusing on finishing high school and had just won a scholarship to study abroad the following year. Dad mourned Mom for a year, and during that time, Sarah would call regularly. "Just checking in on you, Thomas," she'd say. "How are you holding up?" After the year mark, Sarah became more aggressive in pursuing Dad. She was 40 when they started dating, 15 years younger than him. Despite my reservations, Dad seemed less depressed, so I tried to keep an open mind. "What do you think of Sarah?" Dad asked me one evening. "If she makes you happy, Dad, that's what matters," I replied diplomatically. Coming from a Scandinavian family, we're not exactly known for meddling in each other's affairs. Sarah, being from Slovakia, had her own way of doing things. Dad had done well as an investment banker, building substantial wealth over his career. Within 6 months of dating, they were married. Dad never truly recovered from losing Mom, though. His health declined rapidly despite being only 57. One evening, he called me to his study. "Son," he said, looking unusually serious, "what do you need to set yourself up in life?" "Dad, I don't need anything," I insisted. "I can take care of myself. Besides, you're going to be around for a long time yet." I reminded him about his sisters and their kids and mentioned my scholarship. He passed away just a year later at 59. Sure enough, Dad left his 5-bedroom house to me, completely unexpected. His sisters and their kids received modest endowments, while Sarah got about 80% of his liquid assets, amounting to several $100,000. Despite my protests, Dad left me a decent sum too. Sarah tried to hide it, but I could tell she was furious about not getting the house. Living in one of the most expensive neighborhoods in the city, where property values were skyrocketing, the house was worth a fortune. "This house has so many memories," she'd say, her voice dripping with fake sentiment. "Your father and I made such plans for it." During those first few months after Dad's death, things got weird. Sarah started giving me these uncomfortable looks, trying to see if I might be interested in her romantically. "You look so much like your father," she'd say, standing too close. "Same strong features." It was revolting. She continued living in the house since I was away at university, only visiting every couple months to see my cousins nearby. I didn't make a big deal about owning it, and Sarah seemed to forget it wasn't actually hers. "Feel free to use the guest room when you visit," she'd say condescendingly, as if I were a visitor in my own home. The final straw came when she started dating Victor, some sleazy guy barely older than me, just 5 months after Dad's funeral. When I came home after graduation, they were acting like they owned the place. "Oh, by the way," Sarah mentioned casually one morning, "I gave your PlayStation 4 to Victor's cousin. You're really too old for video games now." I maintained my composure while changing all the network passwords that day. "We're getting married," she announced over dinner. "I can't mourn forever. Life goes on." "That's great," I replied, adding, "I've actually got a job lined up with a local pharmaceutical company. I'll be looking for my own place soon." Her face lit up. "But remember, you'll always have a place in our home," she said, emphasizing our. "I should have my own place within 3 months," I told her. She beamed. "Perfect timing. Victor and I are planning our wedding in Slovakia. Just a small local ceremony. Otherwise, we'd invite you, sweetie. But I know you'll be busy with your new job." "Congratulations," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Would you mind watching the house while we're away? Watch my own house?" The irony was delicious. Of course, I'll take care of everything. The moment they left for their 3-month European adventure, I sprang into action. I listed the house on several rental websites and hired professional movers. They packed all of Sarah's belongings and transported them to a storage facility. I kept all my parents' original furniture. "Make sure everything's properly labeled and organized," I instructed the movers. "I'm paying for 4 months of storage, 1 month more than their trip." The response to my rental listing was overwhelming. The house's location and amenities attracted dozens of inquiries. I eventually selected James and Emma Thompson. He's a corporate lawyer, she's a high school teacher with two well-behaved kids. There's something you should know, I told them during the viewing. My former stepmom might cause some drama when she returns, but here's my lawyer's contact information. He can verify that I'm the legal owner. We understand, Emma said. The house is perfect for our family. They signed a year-long lease and paid first and last month's rent immediately. I moved into a nice apartment downtown, close to my new job. That's where I met Rachel at a local cafe. Is this seat taken? She'd asked, coffee in hand. We hit it off immediately, and 6 months later, we were engaged. When Sarah returned, she went ballistic. My lawyer handled everything. I never had to speak to her directly. Your client has no legal claim to the property, I heard him tell her firmly over the phone. All her belongings are in storage unit 247 at Citywide Storage. The first 4 months are paid. From what I've heard through family, Sarah and Victor fled back to Slovakia, probably burning through Dad's money like it's going out of style. I imagine she's already scouting her next wealthy target. The rental income from the house has been incredible. Not only am I helping my cousins with their college expenses, but Rachel and I moved into a spacious apartment in a historic building downtown. I can't believe your stepmom thought she could just take your house, Rachel said one evening as we discussed the situation. The funny thing is, I replied, if she'd just been decent about everything, I might have let her stay. She just had to respect boundaries and stay out of my space. Instead, she got evicted as a wedding gift, Rachel laughed. I did buy another PS4, even though I rarely use the original one. That wasn't the point. The principle of the matter was simple. You don't give away other people's belongings. It's like that old saying, I told Rachel. What goes around comes around. Just last week, I ran into Victor's cousin at a local coffee shop. He actually apologized about the PS4 situation. I had no idea it wasn't hers to give away, he said, looking genuinely embarrassed. Sarah told us you'd moved out and left it behind. Water under the bridge, I assured him. But it taught me an important lesson about protecting what's mine. That's exactly why I had to kick Sarah out of my house, because it's my house, my decision about who lives there. Dad left it to me for a reason, and I intend to honor that by using it to help family and make smart decisions about its future. The Thompsons have been perfect tenants, by the way. They even invited me and Rachel over for dinner last month to show me the improvements they've made to the garden, with my permission, of course. We love this house, Emma told me. It has such good energy now. I couldn't agree more. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just about getting even. It's about making better use of what you have than the person who tried to take it from you ever could. Looking back, I realized Dad probably knew exactly what he was doing when he left the house to me instead of Sarah. He might have been blinded by love, but he wasn't stupid. He knew I'd take care of our family home and use it wisely, and that's exactly what I'm doing, just not in the way Sarah expected. The next one is an entitled people story. I never thought I'd be dealing with a real-life Karen situation, but here we are. This is the story of how my entitled neighbor learned the hard way not to mess with other people's property. My wife and I bought our dream home about 3 years ago, a beautiful 5-acre property just outside the city limits. The previous owner had maintained lovely vegetable gardens and fruit trees, which was a huge selling point for us since we wanted to try our hand at hobby farming. The property also came with a small barn where we store equipment and materials. Everything was great for the first year. We expanded the gardens, planted more fruit trees, and started keeping chickens. Our closest neighbor, Karen, not her real name obviously, seemed nice enough at first. She'd wave when driving past and made small talk if we saw each other at the mailboxes. Things started changing about a year ago. I first noticed some of our produce going missing, not just a few tomatoes or apples, but entire plants stripped bare overnight. Then building materials started disappearing from near our barn. Lumber, bags of mulch, even some tools. At first I thought maybe we had teens stealing stuff or wild animals getting into the gardens. One morning I was drinking coffee on our back deck when I spotted Karen brazenly walking through our garden, filling up a basket with vegetables. I couldn't believe the audacity. "Excuse me," I called out. "What are you doing in our garden?" She barely glanced up. "Oh, just getting some fresh vegetables. The previous owner always let me take what I needed." "Well, we're not the previous owner," I replied firmly. "This is private property and those vegetables aren't yours to take." Karen straightened up, giving me a condescending look. "Don't be so selfish. You have way more than you can eat anyway. It's not Christian to hoard food when others could use it. Whether we can eat it all or not isn't the point. This is our property that we work hard to maintain. Please leave and don't take anything else without permission." She huffed dramatically. Well, I've never been treated so rudely by a neighbor. The previous owner understood about helping the community. The previous owner isn't here anymore. This is our property now, and I'm asking you to leave." She stormed off, but not before grabbing another handful of tomatoes. I was fuming, but tried to let it go, hoping she'd respect the boundary I'd set. How wrong I was. Not only did the produce theft continue, but it escalated. More lumber and supplies vanished from near the barn. Our fruit trees were stripped bare before we could harvest anything. Even our chickens' eggs were being stolen. I installed security cameras covering the garden, barn, and chicken coop areas. Within days, we had footage of Karen making multiple trips onto our property, usually early morning or late evening, taking whatever she wanted. She'd bring large baskets and boxes, clearly planning to take substantial amounts. The final straw came when I caught her trying to steal an entire rose bush she'd dug up from our garden. The security footage showed her struggling to drag the massive plant toward her property at 6 a.m. I'd documented everything and had multiple videos of her trespassing and stealing. Time to take action. I called the non-emergency police line and asked to file a report. 2 officers came out and reviewed the security footage. They were especially interested in the footage showing her taking building materials and tools, since that elevated it beyond just produce theft. "This is clear evidence of ongoing theft and criminal trespassing," one officer said. "Would you like to press charges?" "Yes," I replied without hesitation. "This has been going on for months despite me asking her to stop." They went to speak with Karen while I waited. Through my security cameras, I could see her getting increasingly animated, waving her arms and pointing toward our property. The officers remained calm but firm. A few minutes later, they returned. She claims the previous owner gave her permanent permission to take whatever she needs from the property. We explained that any such arrangement would have ended when the property changed hands. She's being issued citations for theft and criminal trespass with a court date next month. Karen was livid. She started screaming from her front porch about how horrible we were and how she'd make us regret moving to the neighborhood. The officers warned her about harassment and suggested she get a lawyer. Over the next few weeks, Karen tried everything to make our lives difficult. She called code enforcement multiple times with bogus complaints about our property. She'd stand at the property line taking photos and videos of us working in the garden. She even tried to turn other neighbors against us, though that backfired when they saw our security footage. The court date arrived and Karen showed up representing herself, while I had documentation of everything. The judge was not impressed with her claims about having permanent permission from the previous owner or her argument that neighbors should share resources. "Ma'am, this is very simple," the judge said. "You repeatedly entered private property without permission and took items that didn't belong to you. That's theft and trespassing, regardless of any arrangements you may have had with previous owners." Karen was found guilty on all counts. She was ordered to pay restitution for the stolen items, over $2,000 worth when we tallied everything, plus fines and court costs. She was also given 12 months probation and ordered to stay off our property. She tried to argue that the amount was excessive, but our documentation of everything she'd taken over months, produce, materials, tools, etc., made it clear the total was accurate. The judge wasn't having any of her protests. "Consider yourself fortunate," the judge told her. "Given the documented pattern of behavior, this could have resulted in more serious charges. I strongly suggest you respect property boundaries going forward." Karen left the courthouse in tears, but I wasn't done. Our lawyer helped us file for a restraining order given her ongoing harassment after being caught. The judge granted it, requiring her to stay at least 100 feet from us and our property except when accessing her own home. Things have been mostly peaceful since then. Karen still glares when she sees us, but doesn't dare come onto our property. We upgraded our security system further and installed better fencing just to be safe. The best part? Several months after all this went down, Karen put her house up for sale. Apparently she couldn't handle living next to the neighbors who ruined her life by not letting her steal from them. She moved away, and we now have lovely new neighbors who actually ask if they'd like some fresh vegetables. Word got around the neighborhood about what happened. Now Karen is known as the garden thief, and her attempts to paint us as the bad guys completely failed. Several neighbors even apologized for believing her initial claims about us being unreasonable. Our gardens are thriving now that we're actually able to harvest what we grow. We've expanded the chicken coop and added more fruit trees. It's become the hobby farm we always wanted, without entitled neighbors helping themselves to our hard work. The moral of the story? Document everything. Know your rights, and don't let entitled people take advantage of you. Sometimes you have to stand up to a Karen to get your happy ending. Update, 6 months later. Life has been wonderfully peaceful since Karen moved away. Our new neighbors are a young couple who love gardening themselves. We've actually started a neighborhood produce exchange where people can share their excess vegetables and fruits, properly and with permission, of course. I recently ran into Karen at the local hardware store. She tried to avoid me, but I overheard her complaining to an employee about how her new neighbors won't let her share their garden either. Seems she didn't learn her lesson about respecting property rights. The restraining order is still in effect since she only moved about 20 minutes away. Our lawyer advised keeping it active given her history of retaliation. Our security cameras and fencing remain in place. They're just good practice anyway. The best development? We've started hosting gardening workshops for the neighborhood kids, teaching them about growing food and respecting others' property. Several neighbors have started their own gardens, inspired by our success. Karen's old house sold to a lovely retired couple who've become good friends. They often join us for coffee on the deck, watching the gardens grow and laughing about how anyone could think they were entitled to steal from neighbors. The whole experience taught us valuable lessons about standing up for ourselves and the importance of documentation. Our property has become exactly what we dreamed of, a peaceful hobby farm where we control who enjoys our harvest. And yes, we still share produce with neighbors, but only with those who ask nicely and respect boundaries. Amazing how basic courtesy works better than entitled demands and theft. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well, and not letting entitled people continue their bad behavior. Karen learned an expensive lesson about respecting property rights, and our neighborhood is better off for it. The next one is a malicious compliances story. This isn't my story. It was a close friend of a then-close friend. I'm not sure how I never thought about sharing it, as it is one of the best malicious compliance stories I've ever heard. There's also quite a bit of background here, mostly to explain old tech. This guy, we'll call him G, was pretty wealthy. Dude had a nepo job where he worked in a factory, fixing the machinery which almost literally never broke. Someone always had to be on duty to be ready for repairs, so he got all kinds of overtime and was being paid almost $75 per hour in the early 00s. To give you an idea of the kind of money he was making and how he didn't care, he spent most whole days sitting around watching movies on a personal laptop that he had spent over $2,000 on and just left it at his desk. If he had a call to the floor, it would take him no more than an hour, and that would happen maybe 3 times in a week. Holidays were 2.5x pay, and he worked every one of them. This guy was a bit of a tech nerd, and he got an ISDN account as soon as it came out. For you youngins or folks who weren't savvy at the time, ISDN was basically two 56.6 kilobits per second modems smooshed together. This was back when 56.6K was as good as it got for residential, and you could still pay for slower, so fast AF for its day. Back in the days of dial-up, the dark ages, some services would be paid by the minute of usage in addition to your monthly bill, and that's how this worked. Also, because dial-up was literal and used existing infrastructure, you could take your modem with you and use it somewhere else by logging into your account from a new location and dialing the closest number to you. This was also back in the day of long-distance charges. Now for the actual story. G just got his ISDN modem, and after a day or so took it to his brother's house one town over to show him how fast it was, and after they played around on the internet for a bit, G had to go to work and he would be doing some long shifts for the next couple of days, so his brother asked to borrow his modem, which G said was fine. I don't understand exactly how it happened, but his brother had signed into a long-distance number and then forget to shut the connection down. And then G got his first month's bill. It was over $14,000. He immediately called the service provider and explained the situation, and they basically told him, "You signed a contract, sucks to suck, we want our money." He relented and set up a payment plan. He would also be required to keep the contract going until the bill was fully paid. Now, if you've never even heard of ISDN, even if you're 30 plus years old, I don't blame you. This was a very short-lived technology and was replaced by DSL just a couple years later, but unlike ISDN, DSL required new infrastructure, and for some reason I don't fully understand, but I have guessed is probably the way some important switch on the service provider's network was set up. The two services could not coexist in the same small region, regions the size of like a neighborhood. And G lived in a pretty nice neighborhood. Not mansions, but upper middle class. The best neighborhood our small town had to offer, in fact, and people just wanted DSL. It was the first time the internet was getting close to recognizable as it is today, because it was so much faster than what was previously available. The folks in this neighborhood wanted those speeds and did not like being told that they couldn't have it. So, service provider calls up G and explained the situation and offered to waive the remaining amount of the bill. G told them the whole bill was bullcrap and asked if they would refund what he had already paid, but they just told him to go duck himself. Malicious compliance. G tells them he has a contract and points out that they are obligated to fulfill their end of the contract and he will be paying his bill in full, and hung up. He keeps paying. Service provider keeps getting calls from more customers wanting DSL and folks who had previously called, calling back more and more irate. G gets another call, then another, until service provider decides to just tell people exactly who is responsible for their neighborhood's lack of DSL service. His neighbors let loose on him, but does G care? Not at all. Just keeps paying his bill. This went on for more than a year. Eventually, service provider just decided to get rid of ISDN completely, as it was a legitimately outdated technology, and did forgive the remainder of G's bill since they weren't fulfilling their end of their contract, but the whole thing was just wonderful. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.